All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another Unicity product training. Thank you all for joining in, and I'll be introducing myself this time since Sam is out on a mountain looking just like the one you can see right now. It doesn't have a lot of service, so he won't be joining us today. I'll be introducing myself, and for those of you who don't know me, I am not a product trainer. I'm not a scientist, and I therefore won't be talking a lot about the inner workings of the gut biome or about how insulin receptors are affected by ingredients in Bio7. What I will be talking about today is something which should be familiar to anyone who's ever tried to learn or do something new. And it's a phenomenon I call the hump. And I'll start this short training. Today will be a rather short training, but I'll start this short training and discussion with a story to illustrate what the hump is. In 2008, Brian Chesky and Nathan Blecharczyk and Joe Gebbia had run out of money, and most of their hope as well. They had only the slightest promise that their idea for a personal hotel room was actually something that could work because of 50 customers they had in the US. Now, 50 customers is not a lot, but it was enough to give them the idea that maybe this isn't such a crazy idea. Since 2007, they'd approached 20 investment firms in Silicon Valley with the intention of getting money to start their business. The business that they were calling at the time, Air Bed and Breakfast. Out of 20 investment firms, half responded to their emails. Another 5 met with them over coffee, and all of them in one way or another said, no way, we can't do this. On top of that, their one person as a source of money went broke and left them $20,000 in debt, earning $200 a month between the 3 of them. And they were all living in one of the most expensive cities in the world, San Francisco. So they had a couple of options. Their first option was to quit, find real jobs, and split the debt between the 3 of them. And their second option was to solve their way out of this debt and to a successful launch of Air Bed and Breakfast. And it should be noted that they'd already tried to launch 2 times and were unsuccessful in doing so. So with the 2008 presidential election on, they decided to take advantage of all the excitement in a funky way. They found a local printer who was willing to print them 500 cereal boxes for the cost of $0 up front if he could get a cut of the sales. They then went to every store that they could get to in San Francisco to find 1,000 boxes of $1 cereal. They took the cereal home and put that cereal in their own newly printed 500 boxes. To get out of their $20,000 in debt, they realized that 500 boxes was not that much. 20,000 divided by 500 is 40, which means that they would have to sell each box for $40 if they wanted to get out of their debt using this method. So their ingenious minds went to work and they came up with the idea that, hey, let's make these collector's items. So they put the numbers 1 through 500 on the top of each box. With a little bit of creativity and in their advertising efforts, the cereal was a hit, and they made back their $20,000 plus a little extra. The only problem, in November 2008, they still had one crazy idea, no investors, no debt, but no money either. On top of all that, their third partner left them and went back to Boston with his wife. He said, I've had enough. This probably isn't as great an idea as we had thought it was. I'm going to Boston. So again, they were faced with two options. The first option being find real jobs and let this idea quietly die out before anybody notices. And two, maybe we could push a little bit more and a little bit harder for a successful launch. So in November 2008, they met with a mentor who told them to apply for Y Combinator. Y Combinator is a startup incubator, basically a company designed to help new ideas grow into big businesses by getting them more money and access to good resources. The deadline, however, to apply to Y Combinator was the night before this conversation they had with their mentor, and they had missed it. But they emailed the committee begging for an interview application, and they were able to negotiate 2 hours to apply. They got the application in just barely and were invited to an interview. Now, the very first thing out of Paul Graham's mouth, the director of the Y Combinator, was, "You mean people actually use this airbed and breakfast thing?" They said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, that's weird." And the interview went south pretty quickly after that. With their tails between their legs, they walked out of the interview knowing this was likely their last shot with airbed and breakfast. So as a last-ditch effort, Joe Gebbia, one of the Airbnb founders, decided to run out to his car and get a box of Obama O's to leave as a gift with Paul. As he did this, he came back in and he told Paul the 60-second story of how they used the cereal to pay off their $20,000 of debt. On the sad car ride home, the two founders talked over what they could possibly do now to keep their hopes alive. Then the phone rang. It was Paul from Y Combinator, letting them know that they had been accepted to the program. They later found out that they'd gotten the spot with Y Combinator not because Paul Graham thought their idea was good. In fact, he really disliked the idea. But their story of cereal and selling it to make their debt had shown him that they had creativity, hustle, and grit. Airbnb is now in more than 220 countries, has more rooms than the largest hotel chain in the world, outside of COVID, has 6 check-ins every second of every day, and is worth $35 billion. Learning to do what effort it takes to conquer the hump is worth it. So, how do you recognize the hump? Let's break it down a little bit. Enthusiasm for a new idea or dream, such as Airbnb, such as joining Unicity, such as starting a new diet, a new workout regimen, it's pretty easy to generate. Getting excited about what you could possibly become yourself is easy to generate enthusiasm for. It's a totally new land filled with butterflies, expectations, hope, and belief in a much better world. If you see the end from the beginning, it's even tough to keep your enthusiasm down at sometimes. As we start off, we're in what I'm going to call the optimist's overlook. Now, that's a good thing. Enthusiasm and visions are absolutely needed to make something big happen. And as you just heard, an example of the Airbnb founders who were able to keep theirs and end up with a big, big payoff. But what happened in just the first year to even that plan? Well, they suddenly, right after beginning, saw that maybe this wasn't as possible or as easily accessible as they believed it to be from the very beginning. And then they were faced with many, many, many challenges. Not just cereal. In fact, they were even asked one day, "Are you a bed and breakfast company, or are you a cereal company?" And they honestly didn't know how to respond to that, which speaks to how much trouble they were in at the time, right? They were faced with many, many challenges, dips of sorrow, where they couldn't figure out whether this was the solution or whether they would be faced with another obstacle next. They were able to make it to false hope peak, where they thought they had solved the problem and then again were faced with another challenge. Finally, they were able to reach enlightenment and start moving their way up the success incline. Now, this learning curve here is not a novel idea. On the contrary, this is a typical learning curve of a startup like this. You could show this to anyone who's ever tried to start a business, and they tell you how scarily familiar it looks. It might even look familiar to some of you. But there's a section that few people address with as much weight as I think is needed to continue walking and to continue progressing when you get down into these dips of sorrow. And it's this section that will either make you strong enough to handle the pain or force you to look at the idea of quitting. When you're faced with a major obstacle, you'll notice that your effort, stress, and discomfort all begin to surpass your initial confidence and enthusiasm. This is being told your idea is no good by 20 major investors in Silicon Valley. This is the first major soreness after your first gym workout, or the first 5 people on your name list who reject you. We're going to talk about this section right here. And you guessed it, it's called the hump. So let me illustrate the hump with a personal example. When I began running, I was pretty naive. I began running a few years back, and I was very naive, I would say. I ran 4 miles one day, and I thought, this is pretty easy. I'm going to do a marathon, and I'm going to do it within a month. That's my goal. I thought, I'm in good physical shape. I can run. These 4 miles feel pretty easy. I'm going to run a marathon within a month. So I started with 4 miles out of 26.2, by the way. Easily got up to 8 miles the next week. And the week after that, I thought, well, I doubled it last week. I'll double it again. And I ran 16 miles that day. I thought, this is a piece of cake. I totally get how people run 100 miles now. I totally get it. I've solved this equation. I can now run a marathon, and I'll do it this Saturday. Well, I finished that 16-mile run at 11 a.m. on Saturday morning, the Saturday before the marathon next weekend. By noon, both legs were throbbing in pain. By 1 o'clock, I had to keep them up just to keep from shaking. The next day, I literally couldn't walk without a huge limp in my step. And my marathon was set for this coming Saturday. This wasn't just average soreness. Something was wrong here. And in fact, it's a problem that many runners who start out run into. It's that the IT band that runs down the side of your leg starts seizing up. And I couldn't run even a kilometer. It was a terrible pain. So while I eventually figured out how to confront this, and it had to do with rolling it out so hard that I shook with pain. As a grown adult man, I shook with pain. I was this close to just crying. It hurt so bad, and took a lot of time. It took about 2 weeks of rolling that out every single day to start to feel any relief at all. And slowly, I began adding in miles, and I began to be able to run 4, 5, 6 miles again. After the first hump, this particular hump will look different to most people. Some will follow this hump down, and for whatever reason, let's see if I can draw it here. They will be able to coast down and keep coasting for whatever reason. Maybe their IT bands are better than mine, but mine looked a little bit like this. And I kept having to re-deal with the same pain over and over. It got lesser and lesser, but I kept having to deal with that pain. Now, for other people, I get a text about how to deal with this particular hump in running, about twice a month from a friend, a family member, just a random acquaintance that knows I run, and they're dealing with the same problem. Their IT band is seizing up, and I tell them exactly what I did. I tell them, you've got to almost cry. You have to push so hard when you're rolling out that you start shaking. And only about 1 out of 5 takes the advice I give them in order to continue running. In other words, it takes a lot of concentrated effort to get over this hump. And many people aren't willing to do it, especially if the hump takes them by surprise. That, by the way, is the 80-20 principle at work. So let's look at another example of an 80-20 principle at work. Now, I'm in Australia, so I biased this presentation towards the Australian diet, but you have to know that this is probably typical of many of your countries as well. Australians eat less than 20% of Australian adults meet the suggested dietary target of fiber to reduce the risk of chronic disease, right? Fiber is becoming less and less accessible to the modern diet, with all kinds of foods being processed and becoming sweeter just to the palate, improving sales. None of those really are conducive to how much fiber we're getting in our diet. So what are Unicity's solutions to this? The Unicity fiber matrix is incredibly useful. These products that we offer, they are incredibly potent. Now, most of you know that referring to BIOS 7 or BIOS S as simply a fiber is like referring to $1 million yacht as a boat. It's not just a boat. It's a very specific, powerful, and premium product that makes some incredible things happen. However, the primary component in these products is fiber. And that's what happens when you begin introducing, and now what happens when you begin introducing extra fiber in your diet? There's a hump. Well, at first you think, man, I'm really going to start improving my gut health. I'm going to lower my insulin, I'm going to start losing weight, and everything seems to be going smoothly for a second until the first roadblock. Now, with Clearstart, some of you know what I'm talking about here. With Clearstart, this hump might seem to last 30 days. There are some distinct changes that happen with the Clearstart program, and holy smokes, does that product do what it claims to do. But if you don't quite understand this process of a hump, this might be kind of a shock to you. If I'm taking Clearstart for the first time and I don't know what to expect going into it, I might even take this as a sign that my body is rejecting it, is rejecting the fiber or not responding well to it. I'm bloated, I've got gas, my relationship with my wife is suffering a little bit. I might even feel like I have a stomach ache, constipation, diarrhea. Why am I having diarrhea if that's what I'm trying to solve for? I'm getting extra diarrhea so that I can solve for diarrhea? How does that make sense, right? I might even have constipation and diarrhea when I'm dealing with this, right? I'm gaining weight as well. How is this working? Why is this happening? Well, it's the hump. Your body is adjusting. The average person almost never gets the amount of fiber in their diet that they need with the foods they're currently eating. If you didn't expect anything to change, you wouldn't have started this process, right? You wouldn't have introduced fiber. Well, I'll leave it to the scientific explanations to the experts like McKenna, Claudia, and Winda. I will say, however, that you can get over the hump, and you will if you let your body adapt to how it should be functioning. Growing pains are real, and the hump is one of them. So the difference with our Unicity products and creating a $35 billion company is that our Unicity products have been designed so that the hump does not last very long and it dwindles as you go. It's relatively small and it dwindles as you go, right? And I think you've all, many of you have experienced this if you've taken BIOS 7, BIOS S, the Clearstart program. The hump is there. It certainly is there, but it goes away quickly if you continue taking the product and as your body adjusts to it. So what other solutions should we be aware of that have a hump? Unimate. Although we're working on lessening this hump as we speak, your first-time customers might not love the taste of Unimate. That has proven true across the world. And like I said, we are working to solve that hump and lessen that hump as we speak. But for some, it's been an acquired taste, all right? LC Base. This is a product that some have found hard to adjust to because of the, when you introduce higher amounts of good fats, your stomach requires time to adjust to how it digests that fat. And this can sometimes take up to a month, right? So it's important to be aware of this. Just because it's causing you initial discomfort doesn't mean there aren't good things happening in your body. And LC Base was designed to help you to start introducing good fats, good solid fats to your diet. So, Probionic. Winda and Claudia have already talked about what happens in the changing of gut bacteria in your stomach, which can cause similar initial symptoms as introducing extra fiber. But when new bacteria is introduced to your gut, things get gassy. That's just how it is. And that should smooth out within a week or two. So the moral of the story here, some good things take time. And sometimes diarrhea is a sign that you won't get diarrhea as often moving forward, no matter how ironic that seems. So stick with these products until your body finds its groove, and you'll be glad you did. And you should let your prospects know what they can expect, and not only in terms of the short term, but in terms of the long-term benefits. So the key to remember with the hump is, oops, lost my place here. The key to remember with the hump is to always keep your eye on the distance, right? With our Unicity products, at some point, it's going to cross. And the amount of discomfort, and hopefully this will be sooner rather than later. Sometimes it may take a week, sometimes two, but hopefully sooner rather than later, this discomfort will ease and the payoff will be higher, right? So for prospects or first-time users, be honest about what they can expect from our products, both in the immediate term and the long term. More importantly, help them to see that these long-term effects over here are actually going to far outweigh the immediate discomfort. Now, like I said, this is a short training today, but I'm on the business side. I'm on the business building side, rather, of the company. So I have to make a shameless plug for building the business. And there's a reason I started today with a story about building a company we all know and love, Airbnb, right? Some of you have been with Unicity for a long time. Some of you may be joining us for the first time today. Some of you might even be right about here in the dips of sorrow, thinking about calling it in and possibly even giving up. Now, let me tell you something. The hump is real, okay? The humps are real, but they are only humps on your way to enlightenment and to sustained success. When you are encountered with a major obstacle, you need to know two things. One, a major obstacle is usually a good sign that you're on the right path and that you're about to learn something equally as major. And two, you need to know how to react when you come to this major obstacle. Now, I was facing my own hump just last week. I can't get into the details of what that hump was exactly at this point, but I can tell you I ran into what I saw as a fairly major obstacle in the road. I stopped and I thought of a leader I most trust to handle this type of situation. The person I knew would know how to react even if I didn't. And I asked him what to do. His answer was very straightforward, simple, and direct. When in doubt, accelerate. Now, there's a small moment between the first time you see the problem or obstacle and your reaction to it. In this moment, you can decide to do one of two things. The first thing, follow your emotion, which is more than likely telling you to pump the brakes, slow down a little bit, and decide whether or not this obstacle is worth overcoming. Or you can take the second option. You can power through the obstacle with even greater determination and tenacity than before. Side note, this is the part of the presentation that does not apply to how much probionic you introduce to your gut. Accelerating here might wind you up in the hospital. But for most major obstacles, and for the obstacle I was facing last week, this is perfect advice. A leader does not back down from a challenge if she can see that this is the right path. A leader recognizes that to get others to follow her, the bottom of the big ominous mountain is the cue to start running. I'll finish up with one more quote and two challenges. Here's the quote. Most people never run far enough on their first wind to find out they've got a second. So my first challenge is this. With the products we spoke about today, make it a part of your explanation of them to include the hump they can expect, along with how much greater the benefits will be to them if they keep at it. And the second is this. This week, you'll be faced with at least one obstacle. It might be the big hump, the real deal, but it might be a small one that's part of one of the many hills that you'll have to overcome. Either way, stop at the bottom just for one moment and make the decision. Do I want to be the type of person who has a great excuse for discontinuing? Or do I want to be the person who others look to for guidance? If you choose correctly, you'll build or continue to build the resilience that the best leaders in history have been known for. Thank you. So I think I can't imagine what you would want to ask me, but we can take 5 minutes for questions if that's what you'd like. All right, doesn't look like I have any questions, but I'll wait for 30 seconds silently. And if I see one, then we'll answer it. One coming up. All right, I can't wait. Okay, Suli says, what about being in the valley of sorrows? Suli, what's the specific question there? Is it what to do then, or how to act, or what would you like to know? Okay, from Enghai first. When starting down the abyss after coming upon the hump, what should we be telling ourselves to brave ourselves to push forward? I'd say the best advice that I can give to that, and I certainly don't have the most correct answers or the only correct answers, but the thing that I have to tell myself in that moment, and it might even seem a little bit prideful, but the thing that I have to tell myself in that moment in order to keep going forward is I am not average. And if you recognize that you were meant to do something greater, and if you prove to yourself by taking the next step forward that you are not average, that you were meant to do something great, you will find that you'll prove that to yourself every single time. It will become part of your character, and it will become part of how you face obstacles and challenges in the future. So that's what I tell myself in that moment, basing entirely on the idea of the growth mindset. I am not average. I am better than this. Suli says, how do we overcome being in the valley of sorrows? Is that right? It is the same thing, push through the valley? Unfortunately, Suli, it is. It's the same thing. In order to keep moving forward, you simply have to keep making the decision to do that. And it's going to be very tough. And that's the reason we set visions. That's the reason we have a why in front of us. That's the reason we know what we're aiming for. If we know it and we believe that we're going to get to it, if we believe that in front of us is something much, much greater than this small little hump we're going to have to overcome, it's so much easier to take the next step. So in the valley of sorrows, know two things. You're going to face another one, and you're going to build skills while you're doing that. Skills are the most important thing that you can find at the bottom of the valley of sorrows, because you're going to face difficult challenges, but it's all for the good of what you're trying to accomplish ultimately. You're building skills and you're building knowledge for what can take place later, which is the big payoff. Okay, that's all it for your caffeine hit today. It was a bit more of a motivational conversation again, I guess, or a mindset conversation today. But I hope that helped with the idea of our products and our business as well. You're all doing incredible things with this business. You're all working incredibly hard and learning some incredibly important lessons about life and about how to achieve the success that you've always wanted to. And so, Godspeed. Thanks, everyone.